So today, as Pastor Susan shared, we are beginning our series on finding God in contemporary or pop culture. Now, I understand that Susan's father taught a class at United Seminary, correct? Which is our United Church of Christ Seminary in the frozen tundra of Minnesota, the land of the Scandinavian. And you taught a class on finding God in pop culture. And this happens to be actually the seminary that Susan went to, right? Did you take your dad's class? Oh, you did. Did you get an A? Just passed. Well, to my chagrin, my seminary did not do anything with pop culture. We spent most of our time in the 1500s. So this is a beautiful quote from the Ignatian brothers and sisters, and it's a guide to almost everything. Ignatian spirituality considers everything an important element of your life. That includes religious services, sacred scriptures, prayer, and charitable words, to be sure, but it also includes friends, family, work, relationships, sex, suffering, and joy, as well as nature, music, and pop culture. So when Pastor Susan suggested that we do a series in January on pop culture, specifically movies, I was a bit challenged. I often bring pop culture in. In fact, I think that's how to be relevant. I don't necessarily focus on just a movie, so this was a bit of a challenge. But I have to say, as I saw this movie, I saw so much of the presence of the divine and the sacred. So how many have seen this particular movie, Bohemian Rhapsody? Excellent. Somebody came in this morning and said they did their homework. They went and saw it last night. So I appreciate that. So here's another quote that for me really summarizes the presence of God in all things. Ignatian, Meister Eckhart, all the mystics find God beyond this God of heaven, this God of earth, this God up there. They say, apprehend God in all things, for God is in all things. Every single creature is full of God and is a book about God. Every creature is a word from God. I've come to realize that you don't have to find God in all things because God is already in all things. God is simply waiting to be discovered. And it's really just finally coming to that beautiful awareness that God is in the person sitting in the pew next to you, in front of you, behind you. But honestly, God is also in that pew. So this movie, Bohemian Rhapsody, covers the formation of an English rock band called Queen, which you heard me share with our young people this morning. From 1970 to about 1985, when the band comes back together at the fantastic Live Aid concert in London. The movie gives insights into Freddie Mercury's life, a riveting performance from Rami Malek. And he finds his band in a London bar, and he becomes the lead singer of the band. And around the same time, Freddie Mercury meets Mary Austin, or Lucy Boynton, and he calls this woman the love of his life. He gives her a ring, they move in together, but after he's been on tour for several months, he admits to her that he is a bisexual. Her non-judgmental response is incredibly touching, but she does move out to a nearby apartment. And still concerned about each other and still committed to each other, they remain friends for life. There are other challenges for the band throughout their years together. They always had this experimental mix of genres, crossing boundaries, and they run into issues with the recording company. And there's this one scene that I think is hilarious. It's the reaction of the music executive to the song that the movie is based on, which is Bohemian Rhapsody. And if you've heard Bohemian Rhapsody, it's this amazing counterculture song, and a song that has traditional music, classical, rock, And it just follows all these beautiful genres of music. And then, though the relationships between band members and actually even with the producers become more stressed because of Mercury's private life. During one period, he goes off to record on his own, and he becomes more involved in the gay community, hosting wild, booze-filled, fueled parties. And he spirals down. But just before the Live Aid concert, held July 13th, 1985, do you know what the Live Aid concert, anybody remember what it was for? What's that? Ethiopia. Yep, famine in Ethiopia. And it was in a London venue, and there were over, I believe, 75,000 individuals there. After and during the Live Aid concert, the band has kind of this come to Jesus moment. And Mercury tells them that he has AIDS, but he asks them to keep the news private. And I think this is a really profound and insightful thing that he shares. He says, I don't have time to be their victim. I don't have time to be a victim. And in the remaining days, he just wants to be the kind of performer giving people what they want and what they've expected from Queen. So why did this drama win Best Drama? Why did Rami receive the Best Actor awards at the Globes? I think it's because we can relate. It's the story of the human journey. It's my story, and it's your story. Bohemian Rhapsody centers on a queer immigrant. It's the story of the immigrant seeking safety and seeking a home. He's battling internalized biphobia, homophobia, xenophobia, and the stigma of AIDS and HIV, which was at its peak at that time. Malik, who plays Mercury, was asked this question: have the political battles of this year impacted your work on the screen? And he says, absolutely. How could it not? I cannot take my eyes off of what's going on. Who can? It's 2018, moving into 2019, and in America, we are so polarized. And he said, similar to those days when AIDS first came on the scene, similar to those days, he said, when I came out and we were polarized around LGBTQ issues. And he said, everybody right now feels they're in some margin of some kind. And as I watched the movie, being a huge history buff, I saw America, I saw myself. I saw the very worst of humanity, and I saw the very best of humanity. And those of you who watched it probably experienced the same. And it's really the story, in many ways, of the prodigal son that Redeem and Vicki read for us this morning. It's the prodigal daughter, it's the prodigal son. It's the story of all of us, prodigals who have gone our own way, who have been wasteful, extraordinarily extravagant. It's kind of that culture of consumption, that I get what I want and I want it now. And we leave the convention of parents, and we leave the convention of religion or the spirituality or the faith that has been passed down to us. And we leave those conventions because we think we're going to find love and find meaning and find ourselves. And that's the one thing that I appreciate about my roommate. He reminds me constantly, the one thing people are really looking for, James, is love. It's that prodigal relationship that you have with your birth parent. It's the prodigal relationship you have with the divine parent. When we think we can do things our way, and it's really the better way to do it. We've all had our moments with our birth parents, our spiritual parent, times when we needed to reject their guidance, their wisdom, and make our own way in the world. And at least for me, I find myself coming back and coming back and coming back, at least to my spiritual parent, God. And in that spiritual parent, I find that open embrace. I find the arms wide open each and every time, forgiving, reinstating, transforming, no matter what wild detour I have taken. But you know, with my earthly father, not so much. We had a really difficult relationship, to put it simply. I did my part, I think. I'm not really sure I did, but I tell myself I did. I think my father, even though he did not work off of a spiritual framework or a religious worldview or the same worldview I did of extravagant openness and love, I think he still always saw me as the prodigal, the son who disappointed him because I did not become a tool and die maker. Could you imagine that? I didn't go in the direction he wanted me to. And after all, I was gay, and I didn't know how to catch a football or throw a baseball. And I spent a few months on the streets of Chicago, which was really disturbing to him, and I spent a couple of months in juvie. That's not what you want for your child. I went to college, went to grad school, got 2 degrees, and he always told me, you know, Jimmy, the more education you get, the less common sense you got. Could be. But I worked hard in my relationship with my father. And it wasn't until the last 6 months of his life that we finally found space together. That we came together. And I found that warm embrace. So in the movie, I saw this incredibly talented individual finding his voice, attempting to find his way, going in a very different direction that his immigrant parents had expected. But he ends up a hot mess because of wealth and popularity and becoming an idol, and he makes some pretty narcissistic choices with his life. Being born to that immigrant family, they had hopes for this son. There's a scene in which the family member scolds Mercury and says, "So Mercury, now the family name is not good enough for you anymore, huh?" "I changed it legally," Mercury responds, "and there is no looking back." Freddie Mercury, there I go again, was born Farouk Balasara. He came from a Parsi family, had its roots in India, and he was a Zoroastrian by faith. And in the film, you see the prodigal son Mercury leaving his faith, leaving his family to find fortune and fame, to find himself, and in the process loses his true self, and yet in the end finds his authentic self, makes amends, asks forgiveness, and lives his best life, but tragically dies at the age of 45 from HIV and AIDS. It is the human story. It is my journey and your journey. It's the journey to self-discovery. It's the journey to discovering the divine. It's the journey to discovering what life is about. And last week, at the very close of our worship, this was the quote from Rumi. After Carson gave us an amazing message focused on the 3 wise guys or girls. What you seek is seeking you. Clarissa Estes, who's an American poet, a psychoanalyst, post-trauma recovery specialist, author, and by the way, spoken word artist, says this about the search and about finding meaning. She says, all that you are seeking is also seeking you. Similar to Rumi. If you lie still, if you sit still, it will find you. It has been waiting for you a long time. We're all waiting to be found. We're all waiting to be known. We're all waiting to be heard. It is one of the hardest disciplines in our human experience, though, to simply wait. To wait. And to wait. One of my favorite authors, Elizabeth Elliot, says this. She says, waiting on God requires the willingness to bear uncertainty, to carry within oneself the unanswered questions, lifting the heart to God about it whenever it intrudes upon one's thoughts. For Freddie Mercury, this wonderfully prodigal child, and for each of us, the story of lostness and the story of foundness. The story of lostness and the story of foundness. It resonates. It speaks. In the uncertainty and in the unanswered and in the quiet stillness of our hearts when we take the time to listen, that's when we hear God still speaking to us. That's when we find our direction. That's when we find our purpose. And throughout the movie, I kind of found this movie to be in certain respects almost the life of Christ exposed, and also kind of the Greek tragedy model. It's the human tragedy, the divine tragedy. That Freddie is under pressure from a number of issues externally, internally. The real tragedy is that it's only very late in the film when he finally realizes who his real friends are, what real love is, and how he has been deceived in so many and sundry ways. And Freddie discovers these are difficult to see when you're all caught up in world tours and fame and wealth and loneliness and exploring your sexuality. He needs other people to meet his craving for, in the words of the song, somebody to love, for genuine affection, for true family and true acceptance. And I found this beautiful, beautiful quote. You can have everything in life and still be the loneliest man or woman, and this is a kind of bitter loneliness. Does this film have something to say to us about the human journey? Oh my goodness, yes. Does it have to say something to us about our connection to the divine, our connection to each other, our connection to beloved community, our connection outside these walls? You bet it does. And then he goes on to say, which isn't on the screen, he says, success has brought me world idolization and millions of pounds. Of course, that means money in English. But it's prevented me from having the one thing we all need, a loving, ongoing relationship. A loving, ongoing relationship. That's the core of the story of the prodigal. That's the core of the story of the father, the mother, the divine parent who is always forever waiting. That's the core story of the search for love, searching for community, searching for a loving, ongoing relationship. And in a pivotal scene in the film, Freddie comes back to ask forgiveness from his father and his other band members for his conceit and his selfishness and his narcissism in pursuing a solo career and the lure of filthy lucre as a key motivator. And like the prodigal, in a rare display of humility, he admits that he was wrong, that he was trying to go it alone, and he needs to challenge and squabbles of being a family of choice and a family of birth. And you need those things, he says, to achieve greatness. No matter how many steps you've gotten away from God, it still only takes one step back. And I'm not even sure it's a step back, because God's always there. I need beloved community. Freddie Mercury needed beloved community. I know that's why you're here. We need a spiritual family. We need a physical family to find our true selves, to find our whole selves, to find our spiritual self, to find our connectedness to the divine and our connectedness to one another. And it's really messy to be in spiritual family. In fact, it's really messy to be in your birth family. It's just messy to be in family. Let's face it. But we're here, we're together, and we're finding our path, and we're sharing our journeys, and we learn from one another. It was so beautiful today how Vicki shared the Spanish reading to inflect and to share her own journey and her own story and to inject that. And being on a spiritual path does not prevent you from facing times of darkness, loneliness, narcissism, but it teaches you how to use the darkness as a tool to grow. That is the beautiful other side of the story. The story of the prodigal man and woman and child, Freddie Mercury. It's about the challenges of life, the choices that we make, the journey, but there's always the tools for growth and for transformation. In conclusion, toward the very end of the movie, Freddie the prodigal, he finds his true self, I think. He finds true love, and you see the excitement and the joy as he shares in that moment as they're raising money for Ethiopian famine. And he finds true love and finds himself as he enters into a stable relationship with Jim, a gentle, caring man that he will live with till the rest of his life, till he dies of AIDS. What I find revolutionary about him, even today, is that he refused to ever be defined. He refused to be defined or to be categorized and put in some sort of box. You see him when he's performing, and he rarely looks down at the front row. He rarely looks down at the front row because he's reaching out to everybody. That was one of his greatest gifts. His great ability to show us a human life, but a life that finds its purpose and meaning and finds divinity and finds love. In the end, Freddie and Jim visit Freddie's physical family, and this is actually the real Freddie Mercury. The prodigal comes home to find acceptance, to find a warm embrace, to find a welcome home. That's at least his hope. And there's a mixture of comedy and feel-good melodrama. It's not really convincing, I think, in the movie, but we have some sort of prodigal son scene, right, where Freddie's austere father hugs him. The father, it seems, kind of gives him a half hug, accepts him with some reservations. His acceptance doesn't seem necessarily very convincing. I wonder if that's how we also relate to our spiritual parent. I know sometimes I do. I'm not really sure I've been fully accepted. I have my doubts. There are times I wonder, have I lived up to your expectations, oh God, Mother, Father? Have I done enough with my life? I look at my resume and I've done more than any one person should. And yet I wonder, have I really done enough? Have I loved enough? Have I found my true, authentic self yet? But the rub is, and the difference is, between your earthly parents and your mothers and your fathers and your divine parent, that's a relationship that lasts. The relationship with your divine parent is the relationship that goes on and on and on. And at least I believe we are accepted completely just as we are. Just as we are. I'd like to end with this quote from Augustine. God loves each of us as if there were only one of us. God loves each of us as if there were only one of us. It's strange that sometimes it takes moving into your 50s and strangely enough into your 60s when you never thought you would live that long, that actually becomes a real reality. A real reality.